Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon. I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to vlog 193. How to stand out as a PhD underdog. This vlog comes via request from Carolyn. Hello, Carolyn. Remarkable, odd, unusual request. I never thought of doing something like this, but it emerged from her in response to my recent vlog about how to get an academic job. And the message from Carolyn, I will read a bit of it because it's quite powerful. She said, "What I really miss in academic life and community is the idea of it being open to diversity. A lot of PhD students are just some sort of weird cut and paste in terms of background, ideas and grades. More professors need to be aware of the potential biased idea of an ideal PhD student compared to what the potential research underdog can bring to the table." It'd be great to have a vlog, insider tips and tricks as part of that as well. How to stand out as a PhD underdog. What a fantastic message. It's a great request, and as I always try and do, your wish is my command, so I've done the research quite quickly. Odd and interesting, and often pretty disturbing research in this area, but look, it's also been a hell of a lot of fun. So we're going to start with a discussion of power in the university system, then go into the nature of the underdog, and then finish off with some strategies to survive, but also, I hope, thrive, and yes, stand out. And look, we're going to start with a key truth of university life, and it is a truth that I always try and remind students from first year right the way through to university, and that is universities exist to reinforce the stature and the power of the already powerful. The history of our universities is a history of the education of the elite that go on to rule the world. So who do we educate? We educate the clergy, we educate the military, we educate the people who go out into the world and colonize places. That's who we educate. So universities, in terms of both teaching and research, exist through their very history to solidify and increase the power of the powerful. And that's why in white-dominated nations, it's heterosexual, procreative white men who are the vice-chancellors and the presidents of our universities. In Australia, for example, only 22% of full professors are women. And here's another statistic that should horrify you. It left me shaken when I was doing the research for this week. In the United Kingdom, amongst the 19,000 professors that were recorded in 2016 and 2017, 19,000, there were 25 black women and 90 black men. Now, this is really uncomfortable information. And as we talked about in an earlier vlog, the invisibility of staff and students with a disability is extraordinary. So we can't even recognise the problem by looking at data sets. We can't even recognise the problem of students and staff with disabilities, let alone solve it. It's completely invisible. So as you can see, our universities actually don't want underdogs. We're very happy for all sorts of people, including underdogs, to come into our undergraduate programs and consume degrees, particularly when fees are being charged. But look, there have been some changes to university systems, but not as much as you may think. Think about how often in popular culture, so all those films set in universities, and there's a lot of them, how often do you ever see an academic with a disability? How often do you actually ever see a female academic, or indeed an Indigenous academic? And the answer is very rare. Think about all the films set in universities, and it is white male professors that are the characters. That's the drill. The only time we see an academic in their 70s, 80s or 90s are those remarkable stories of the 92-year-old woman or the 94-year-old woman that's just gained her PhD. And that's a great story. They're wonderful stories. But those stories are not being sold or told to us to go, oh, well, look, that's great. We have a lot of older people in our universities. Let's acknowledge that. Instead, that individual person is summoned as being sort of weird and really unusual and a bit quirky. So it's almost a problem. It's not something that's a strength. And we have students at Flinders University between the ages of 23 and 93 in our PhD program. That's our normal. So it's not unusual. Therefore, there have to be some reasons for the scale of the inequalities that we are seeing. And look, there are pretty rational, logical arguments about this. I mean, let's just do it. Patriarchy is in men's interests. It's logical and it is rational for men to repress half the world's population. That makes a lot of sense because it allows men, if you think about it, to knock out half their competition. So it makes it a lot easier for them to get on, and that's great, it makes perfect sense. And also, look, you know, they get a chance to not do a lot of housework. And trust me, as someone who is fighting with my laundry room most days, I understand that. If I could avoid housework, I would as well. So as I've always said, people go, oh, patriarchy, misogyny. Patriarchy is very, very logical and rational. Makes a lot of sense. Similarly, colonisation is in the coloniser's interests. It's in the interests of white people to go out into the world and pretend that the English language is the world language, is the only language, to pretend that 2 or 3 religions are the direct pathway to a particular deity, and that particular models or versions of education and family and law can be generalisable throughout the much of the rest of the world. So, it's in the interests of the able to focus on the things that those who are disabled, what those disabled people can't do, rather than focusing on what disabled people can do. So let's focus on, well, there's the disabled people over there, 20% of the population, they can't do this. Why not focus on what they can do? Well, if you focus on what they can do, they're competing with you. Thanks for playing. Similarly, and this is always one that amuses me, it's in the interests of people under the age of 65 to marginalise the expertise of people over the age of 65. If you think about it, that's just bizarre to me. You know when you see people treat older crew like their children, and I'm going, they're much more experienced than me. So the idea that we marginalise the people that know more always just seems ironic, funny, and also pretty terrible too. So as you can see, the point I'm making is we gain from oppression. We gain from marginalisation. We gain from disempowerment. So whatever majority group that we're in, we hold the power, right? So I am white. I'm white. I'm so white. I'm blue. I'm white. I'm so white. And that means that I can wander through life most of the time and not have to think about race or racism. I don't have to confront that issue. I don't have to think about it. So I gain from racism. I gain from racism. So as you can see, it's not in the interests of the powerful to relinquish power. So what is unusual in our universities is we have had a widening participation agenda in the last 20 to 30 years, depending on the national system we're talking about. And it was implemented for social justice reasons, for social mobility reasons, because there's no doubt education grants you life choices, full stop. But also, higher education is in the interests of empowered federal or national governments because it masks youth unemployment. It also moves the burden of training from the private sector, that is industry, to the public sector, universities. You can see what happens. And you might notice that the widening participation agenda that emerged in our universities happened at the very point that people started to pay fees for that undergraduate degree. So disempowered people were welcomed when they had to pay to get a degree. So they became a consumer of a degree. But the expectations of those disempowered people were capped. So to the undergraduate degree. Bit of education is great, not too much. And so while to this day we see the cohort in undergraduate degrees somewhat mixed, by the time we hit the PhD, something remarkable occurs. The students of colour disappear. Indigenous students disappear, students with disabilities disappear, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, non-binary identifying students also disappear. So why does that happen? Well, the university system is not geared to enable social change. Remember, you're configuring an original contribution to knowledge in your PhD. You're not being asked to configure a radical contribution to knowledge. So universities exist not to change, but to solidify the powerful. And I think Carolyn's point is a really strong one. That's why it struck me as a message, I think. What about the underdog in our university system? What about the underdog in our higher degree programs? And this is a powerful and really sad story for me. And soon after I started this job as Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, I try and read the doctoral research every day, every week if I can. And the saddest statistic about higher degrees emerged in a book I read on the United States doctoral programs. And this data set from the States confirmed that the students most likely to attrit, that is, the students most likely to leave a PhD program, not even completing it, let alone passing or failing, just leaving the program, are students of colour, women, older students, and students with a disability. Can I confirm also the research that I'm doing on rescue supervision, and that's a very disturbing area. So they're the students where the supervisor sort of walks away at speed and it's all a bit of a crisis and you need to bring a rescue supervisor in to attempt to get the student through. Those cases also reveal the same sociology. That's the group where the supervisor walks away. So something is happening here. And obviously this creates profound toxicity for individual students, but it also means, and I think this is the tragedy and why I decided I was going to do this vlog, what this also means is every individual student that arrives into a doctoral program, a woman, student of colour, student with a disability, every single one of those students needs to reinvent the wheel. They're an individual struggling through the system again, and the system doesn't change, and they either make it or they don't, and thanks. So let me just put some people behind this, because I think it's very easy to sort of mention the underdog and mention these sociological groups, and we're not actually understanding the people involved in this story. Now, I'll give you some stories of 2 Indigenous students and a woman in her 60s. So let's start with the woman in her 60s doing a PhD. And she was told by a supervisor that she didn't have the ability to do a PhD and, quote, she should go home and do some crocheting. End of quote. One of these remarkable Indigenous students, a woman in her 60s, was told that there was no real research in her PhD and really she should leave the PhD program and maybe write a book about her personal experiences because she wasn't a researcher. The third case, a young Indigenous man, was informed that he simply wasn't going to be able to reach the standards of a PhD, and maybe he couldn't even reach the standard of a master's, and he should just leave. Now that young man went on to gain an A and a B result, so that's straight through and minor corrections, an A and a B from 2 of the greatest scholars on planet Earth. An A and a B. And his PhD is now a book with a British publisher. That remarkable Indigenous woman who was told, go home and maybe write about your life story, she finished her PhD with an A and a B, and she certainly got a book. It wasn't a book about her life story. Her PhD became a book for Springer. And finally, that courageous woman who was told to go home and crochet is finishing her PhD before Christmas. So what do we learn from these stories? Very easy to talk about the stats and stuff, but these are real people. Real people's lives with families and hopes and aspirations. So what do we learn about these stories? Well, we learn that supervisors, higher degree coordinators, academics get it wrong. Get it wrong a lot. Get it wrong. And they get it seriously wrong, not because of the quality of the work, because as we've seen, the work is actually of quality. Examiners, international examiners, rendered it high quality work. What's going on? Assumptions about race, about gender, about age in those particular scenarios. Because we all expect truth and rationality and knowledge to be packaged in particular ways. And the problem is that racism, ageism, sexism, colonisation, homophobia, transphobia creates lenses, a lens of ignorance. So what happens is we as supervisors, we don't see the research. We just see the person, but we don't even see the person, because that lens is actually a mirror, and all we see are our own prejudices reflected back at us. We think that knowledge exists in particular types of bodies and in particular ways. And that's prejudice. That's prejudice. So for the rest of this vlog, what I'm going to do is provide some strategies for the underdog to see how you can survive in this system, and I hope thrive in this system, and how you can manage the prejudice, how you can manage the assumptions, how you can manage the neglect. But let's put in place some definitions of the underdog for a sec, and why universities just are not dealing well with the underdog, and it operates quite differently than the rest of our culture. So the underdog is a person, a sporting team, or a community that is expected to lose. The top dog is the winner, and of course the top dog beats the underdog. This word actually does emerge from dog fighting in the 19th century, where the dog that lost was the underdog. But of course the ideology of the underdog is a little bit more complicated than that. We see it in the Bible through David and Goliath. We see it through, say, Robin Hood. So all these myths that exist in our culture. And of course the role of the underdog in sporting culture is really clear. The underdog is part of popular culture. They are not expected to win, but when they do, there's this popular energy and excitement that they actually succeed. And again, there's lots of popular cultural movements through the underdog. Charlie Chaplin's The Tramp did it probably the best of all. He played with this ideology of the underdog. The empowered characters who were the villains in his films were always beaten by the ingenuity of the little tramp. Fantastic. And management theory and self-help gurus use the underdog a great deal. And of course, Malcolm Gladwell, Yawn, wrote a book on the underdog. I'm never getting those 4 hours of my life back again, so please don't you spend those 4 hours. I took one for the team, so Malcolm Gladwell, a bit obsessed about the underdog. So there's a general theory of the underdog, and the question then is, the underdog exists in popular culture. Why are they invisible in our universities? Now that's the key question in response to Carolyn's email request, I think. That's the interesting issue. So the underdog exists everywhere, but doesn't nest well in universities. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And I've read a lot of blogs from PhD students recently that complain that we see a lot of stories about, the success stories. Here is the great scholar in a PhD program who's incredibly successful. We also see the failure stories. Here's someone who enrolled in PhD and failed. Thanks for playing. We don't see the stories, and this is brilliant, we don't see the stories of someone who enters a program, struggles, and makes it at the end. That's the underdog narrative. And I realised when I was writing this vlog that the underdog narrative just doesn't sit well in the doctoral narratives of excellence, because doctoral degrees are about success, achievement, excellence. And academic life is tough, and we've talked about it a lot in the last few vlogs. It doesn't leave a lot of room in university life for alternative ways of being or thinking or doing research. We just don't have those spaces. So being an underdog in a university is not of value. Being brilliant and successful in a way that is measured by particular metrics, that's what's valued in our universities. That's what's hired, that's what's promoted, that's what is successful. But I know and you know that life struggles are great teachers. The experience that we go through in life always requires expertise to temper it. So experience in and of itself is not a great teacher, but when melded with expertise, it's phenomenal. But there is no doubt, I think, that the experience of struggle makes us better teachers, makes us better learners, and also unusual problem solvers in research. But the dominant culture that we're talking about is so powerful in our universities that the value of difference, different histories, different views, different pathways, just there's no space for them. There's no space for them. So we have to make those spaces. But what I would say to you is waiting for the empowered to notice you, you're going to be waiting a long time. But here are some strategies to create some space for you to excel, to transform, and also translate higher education into that underdog narrative. Let's do that. 1, be reflexive, discover what life struggles have taught you. So really be conscious of that. So you've gone through all of these incredible experiences that have knocked you down a few times. Think about them and start to journal them. Work out what they've taught you. Have consciousness. So if we are to value the underdog in higher education, let alone in higher degrees, we have to talk about and we have to write about what life struggles have taught you, how they've made you a better scholar. Einstein, for example, was Jewish and fled Germany, and he relinquished his German citizenship in 1933. Now, how did that experience, that incredible experience, Nazi Germany, wow, how did that experience impact on his science? Now, markedly, you could argue quite strongly, and I actually paid this argument, that, look, his experience of life probably didn't impact greatly on his theory of relativity. I get that, that's cool. But Einstein was a whole person. He was a socialist. He was a peace activist. He wrote affidavits to support European Jews, particularly European Jewish intellectuals, to leave Europe. And he supported civil rights for African Americans. But there is a link between his lived experience and his science, and I got quite upset when I was reading this research this week, that obviously Einstein's research was described in Nazi Germany as, quote, Jewish science. Jewish science. So he took that prejudice, he took that discrimination, and he used it to transform the lives of others. Obviously his record on feminism and women's rights is not as strong, but there's all sorts of remarkable bits of the Einstein story. Fascinating guy. And look, he supported homosexual rights before it was gay rights, so he supported homosexual rights. He also supported animal rights. So he was a man of his time, but through his experiences of oppression, he transcended his time. So think about you. Think about your experiences and how it's changed you. What have you fought for? And therefore, what will you fight for? 2, important one, don't expect respect, acknowledgement, or understanding of your life and struggles. Universities are tough places. They're competitive places. They're often really nasty places. And therefore, it's important to build success, have a narrative of success, and share those successes. Full stop. Universities are not institutions of excuses. And sadly, discrimination, prejudice, marginalisation may be read by the empowered, you've guessed it, as excuses. But I've always described those of us who come from marginalised groups as being culturally bilingual, because we have to learn to speak the language of the empowered to be successful. So we have to learn that language, we have to translate our lives into those metrics of success. and particularly focus on the metrics that the empowered respect. But we have a secret advantage. We're also culturally bilingual. We can speak to different communities and gain credibility when we do so. The empowered only have their power. We can speak to that, but we can show mobility and we can speak to different groups. So welcome the struggle. Welcome those problems, those issues, those concerns, those fights that you've got to enact on a daily basis. Welcome them, because those moments teach you different words, different vocabulary. So you're going to be able to make it easier for the people that follow you, because you can translate your life and experiences into and for diverse communities. 3, friendships matter. Being an underdog in higher education, let alone a higher degree, is incredibly lonely. It's important to find friendships. And you know what? They may not be in your discipline. It is really important to get beyond your silo and find friends who may not share your discipline, but share something else, share your experiences of race or colonisation or gender or age, linguistic differences, share that. And those conversations you have are enabling for you. Respect those friendships. Nurture those friendships. They will last a lifetime and they will transform your life, and together you'll be successful. Friendships matter. I wouldn't be who I am without the friendships in my life, and they're long-term friendships. 4, again, crucial one. Recognize that your supervisor may not be able to supervise the whole person. Supervisors who can supervise diverse students are very rare. Recognize, particularly if you're outside of dominant cultures in some form, that a supervisor is not going to be able to address all your needs. And you have to make peace with that. Get out of that supervisory relationship what you can and find that social support elsewhere. And that leads to my next point. 5, yes, use social media. Let me tell you how. Social media matters because it is deterritorialized. If you are an underdog, you are a minority by definition. And if you wait for your institution to notice you, you're going to be waiting an incredibly long time. But what you can do is actively seek out those communities that will support you. So I'll do another shout out to the wonderful owls on Facebook, Older, Wiser Learners, a great community of PhD students over the age of 50. Great community, and so many of you are incredibly successful. You share the ups and downs. It's just so empowering to see how you're caring for each other. A wonderful group, owls. Also the LGBTQ research and researchers in higher education. Great group as well. Also on Facebook, Women in Academia Support Network. Again, very good, empowering group that. Very interesting. I feel really privileged to be part of that. So basically, pick any area, any group that's doing a PhD, and you will find a group for that on Facebook, on Instagram, or through a hashtag on Twitter. So claim that space. Claim that support, use it, build relationships, connect, and yes, be visible. This is important, I think, because there are very few, much to my tragedy and upset on a daily basis, there are very few transgender students in each individual institution. There are very few Indigenous students in each individual institution. So you're going to need to arch beyond your university. Find supporters, find allies. Find people that understand you, that are literate in your life. The daily injustices, they understand the daily struggles you see on the street every day, and what you have to manage before you even think about doing research, the struggles you have to manage being who you are. I get that. Also, can I say, introduce yourself to the Dean of Graduate Research or their equivalent around the world. We want to meet you. We really want to meet you. Tell us about you. We want to hear your stories. Tell us about you. Tell us how we can help you. But more importantly, you're helping us. This is important. You're helping us because we'll learn from you to make sure that our systems and structures are more helpful for the students that follow. So you are helping us when we help you, so don't hesitate. And look, I wanted to finish with one story, if I could. It's a cliche, really, about dominant culture, about normative culture. My father, Big Kev, just about to turn 92, you rock, Big Kev. My father used to tell me, Tara, if you hear hoofbeats, don't assume it's a zebra. If you hear hoofbeats, don't assume it's a zebra. Now look, I used to believe that. Yeah, if you hear hoofbeats, don't assume it's a zebra. But you know what I've learnt in life, as you know, a pretty old bird now, what I've learned in life is when I hear hoofbeats, I don't make any assumptions at all. When I hear hoofbeats, I know it could be a Clydesdale, I know it could be a Saanen goat, it could be a donkey, it could be a unicorn, hell, it could be the start of Monty Python's Holy Grail. Could be the start of Monty Python's Holy Grail. When you hear hoofbeats, it may be a zebra. So what we need to do is we need to acknowledge the differences, acknowledge the support, and create the spaces for difference and for change. So when we hear those hoofbeats, we welcome what and who arrives. I wish you love, light, and peace. Tia.